I dropped two really helpful resources in the chat. The first is a site, Ask UP, which is a website created by the Association of University Presses with organized around a Q&A format to answer all of the questions that prospective scholarly authors often have about the book publishing process. So I highly recommend you check that out. There's also questions and answers regarding journal publications as well. And then the second link I dropped in the chat is a subject area grid. And basically it is a giant Excel spreadsheet or PDF, depending on what you download, that lists every press that is a member of the Association of University Presses and the areas they publish in. And so my biggest piece of advice to prospective authors, whether it's their first book or their second book, is to spend some time researching the presses you're interested in publishing with and making sure that they actually still publish in your area. The best way to do this is to look at recent books published within the last 3 to 4 years. Look at the presses that look at the presses that are publishing those books, and then sort of build your list from there. Don't necessarily rely on the books or presses that published your favorite books from like 10 or 20 years ago, because the press may not necessarily be publishing in that area anymore. And so when you reach out and express interest in publishing with that press, they might have to say, well, sorry, your project's not a good fit for us. Not because there's an issue with your project, but just because they don't publish in that area anymore. The one other thing I wanted to mention, or piece of advice I wanted to provide that is particularly pertinent, I think, for first-time authors who are revising dissertations into book manuscripts is really take your time. The dissertation is so different from a book, and I loved that Kashana actually really took everything that she had dropped from her dissertation and turned that into a book. If we could all do that, that might make for their first books. But take your time with revising. I'm happy to I can provide some more books on revising dissertations in the chat. But really think, so the dissertation is sort of all about demonstrating your training and your knowledge to a group that is already immersed in your field, right? The book is more about making an argument, making your claim. And so as you're revising, really, as much as you can, feel empowered to actually make your argument. You are the expert here now. This is the time to really, what do I want to say, strut your stuff? To really feel confident in the work that you've done and in what you have to say. That's when people ask, like, what are acquisitions editors looking for in a proposal or in a project, it's not necessarily about the argument being cutting edge or super new. It's about the author making an argument. That alone will do a lot of work for you.
Can you unpack that more? Because I think that was something that we aren't prepared for in graduate school, like just the book writing process, right? So I didn't realize how long it would take. And I think that's the thing where, especially for folks like you, as you're thinking about like tenure clock, and I'm not sure of the audience here, let me know the audience, here, Catherine, but especially for like those of, especially for folks, junior folks who lost time during like COVID, and, they're thinking about like the timing to get things out for 30-year review or, mid-year review or whatever, a lot of folks are not aware of how much time like that it actually takes to get the book from ideation phase, proposal, like, so maybe it could be useful, for the folks just to understand that, because I had no idea.
That's a great point. I mean, and I think the process is going to be a little bit different based on institution and whether or not you're at a place that requires a book for your tenure. So I'm at an institution that does, right? So I was required to publish a university press book. And that's a really important thing. I think we've said a couple of times that's important to point out some distinctions in, that we keep referencing university presses because for a lot of institutions to get tenure, your book must be published with a university press. And in addition to it being a university press, some universities have specific presses that they value in different ways versus others. So it's really important to have those conversations very early on in your career about what is an acceptable press for me to publish with for the process of tenure. I think for many of us, the idea is that by the third year review, so 3 years out, that we would have a contract in place with a press, which means that your proposal would be complete and it would have been submitted to a press. And we're going to talk a lot about, yeah, that's a great point, Key. Yeah, Routledge does not count at a lot of institutions. There's other great presses like Polity that are publishing fantastic, Palgrave, et cetera. This is a really, really important point. That can be scholarly presses, but are still not considered university presses. And the rationale behind that is that many folks believe that the review process is a little bit different with university presses than it is even with scholarly or commercial presses, right? So they're looking for the same rigor of review that would happen in a journal article in your field for the book process. And it doesn't mean that books that are not published with university presses aren't rigorous. It just means that that is the kind of criteria or bar that some tenure committees have set forward. So the proposal is kind of the first thing that has to happen after folks have some notion of what they're going to write about. They want to approach a university press. They've maybe done some of that research and looked up what presses are publishing in their area. And then there's this new prospect of writing a proposal. And the proposal for the book is so different than the dissertation proposal. So would you all mind jumping in and talking a little bit about what a book proposal looks like in this process?
Go ahead, Raven.
I was just going to say, the proposal absolutely is totally different from the diss in that it's, for me, was more concise and not just like obviously in terms of length, but in terms of your argument. Like I had to be much clearer, much sooner, like first page of the proposal. What am I arguing? How is it different than what's out there? And almost like layman terms, right? So rather than, you know, flowery language and you have all this time to think with your diss, the proposal is like cut and dry. This is what it is. This is why it's important. This is why I'm excited about it. And that was kind of freeing. Like I liked sort of distilling, drop the jargon, distilling my argument to like a clear framework.
I've often heard folks describe writing the book proposal as a marketing venture as much as it is anything else. Maybe Caitlin, you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Raven said. From my perspective, I am a nerd. I am interested. I'm in scholarly publishing as opposed to commercial publishing because I love talking to scholars about all their little specific nerdy ideas. But when it comes to reading a proposal, I love proposals that right off the bat in that first paragraph say, this is what I'm arguing. This is not even how it's different necessarily, but like how it's contributing or how it's intervening on conversations happening in my field right now. And the clearer you can be up front, the more, to me, it will seem like you have a solid book project in mind in development. I just want to share some like really basic stuff. So for MSU Press and for most university presses, a proposal is I'll say like 3 to 5 page project description. And a lot of presses, including us, will ask for an annotated table of contents and then 2 sample chapters, ideally from the core of the project. So not like obviously your intro and your conclusion. That doesn't really give us a good sense of sort of how you handle evidence, how you write, and then a CV. So those are just like sort of the bare bones of what we expect from a proposal.
So listen, what I proposed for intersectional tech is not what intersectional tech became. I'm terrible with proposals and I also think that I ran into the issue of writing, especially since I struggled, I wanted to write something that I thought an acquisitions editor would want to hear. I was like, I think they might like this, instead of thinking about what my project is, I'm like, this seems hot and sexy, and I think they might like this. And that's completely the wrong way to like do it, And I think that's probably why like I had struggles, because people, I'm writing about it, and then people are like, okay, Shauna, is this really what you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. Is it? Do you like it? So, I struggled, like a little bit with that, just trying to like get my book writing confidence up, because book writing is completely different from like, like article writing, right? I mean, I will say, because I did want to mention, this might be a good place to talk about that. The only reason why I did those edited volumes is that I got the advice. I don't know if it was good advice or not good advice, but I did Woke Gaming because I don't know if it was an acquisitions editor or somebody that said, Kishana, since there's not really like a field around this, critical race and gaming, an edited volume is like a good way to like get that out in the world. So that's one of the reasons that, we did Woke Gaming, so people could see that there was like this critical race, feminist intersectional perspectives, that were happening like around gaming. And then having that book be legible, would make it a little bit easier so people could say, hey, there's something to latch onto. So that's really the reason that I did edited volumes. Now they didn't count, they don't count for anything, for tenure and promotion, so, I did that one, and also like feminism in play, because there's just like some voids, I think, gaming studies had not caught up to like these critical perspectives and ways of thinking inside game studies. So that's the only reason why I did those. But I would say they helped a whole lot. But, that first proposal for like intersectional tech, I knew that I wanted to, to focus a lot like on intersectionality, I wanted to focus on what Black folks were doing inside the gaming space. But I didn't know what that story would be, especially because, my methodology like is ethnography, so I'm like, I can, take a snapshot of some data at any point, but, the snapshot, from 10 years ago looks different from 5 years ago. That looks different from like a year ago. So I think it was really hard. I'm like, I don't know what story I'm trying to tell right now. And I think you just got to be honest with yourself. So when I started out writing, I didn't know how intersectional tech was going to end up. I just didn't. I just trusted the process. I trusted myself, but I also trusted that, the data is there. I'm just trying to make that legible to these academic audiences, apply some frameworks, to it. And, I think that it turned out okay. Now it was a very stressful process, right? Especially like when you're thinking about like putting the stories together and putting the pieces together, like a lot of times it don't seem like that they're going to fit it all, but trust yourself and just keep writing, and I think as long as you have like good drafts, you can always go through and, figure out like, that narrative and that weaves together like the whole argument. But also for me, I was just weighing and taying in the wind. A lot of times I'm gonna be totally honest. I'm just writing.
Though she is not a prolific author so frequently, as she's working on like book number 5 or 6 right now. But I think, she raises an important point about the distinction between a monograph and an edited volume. That's important for us to just quickly get to. And I know, Kishana, don't do an edited volume as your first book, baby, right? Was kind of the advice, because that doesn't count for tenure. But I think what you pointed out was so important, that edited volumes do important work for careers, even if they don't necessarily get you tenure, right? So Kishana is so well known in the field because she's the person who edited the collections on her area, right? That everyone had to know her in order to get their work published. And so they can serve some really valuable networking possibilities and some really like field and groundbreaking possibilities. And also, a way to get to know senior scholars in your area, as letters are required for the tenure process as well. So a lot of reasons to do those, but maybe a lot of reasons to not, that's not to be the first thing that you do. You said something that I would love to be teased out a little bit more, which is that writing a book, of course, is so different than writing a journal article. And I'm not sure that we all totally understand that, right? So maybe many of us here have only written journal articles so far. What is so different about writing a book than writing a journal article?
You want me to answer that? You want me to speak to that?
Sure. Then maybe Raven can jump in too.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference that I saw was that whenever I'm writing books, I feel like I'm telling stories. like really in like this narrative prosy kind of way. It's almost like, I always talk about, Tyrell is like, one of the like in the anchoring story, like in an intersectional tech. And I was like, I just want to tell your story. One day, Tyrell, he played the game and then this happened and this happened. Like it was really like, kind of like narrative, storytelling, which is why I kind of fell in love with like writing books, because I valued that. Whenever I think about like article writing, it seems so prescriptive like the way where it's like a template, like you have to have the intro, then you have to have the theoretical framework, then you have your method section, how did you design it, so it seemed too much like technical writing. Like for me, articles are very technical writing, but it was also when I got that advice, it was also very useful for me, because then the writing of an article wasn't so tedious, because I was like, okay, it's, I just fill in the blanks here. I'm gonna fill in the blanks here, whereas, book writing was completely different. I have more feelings and emotions, whenever like I'm doing the book, because, I'm telling like these stories. I hope that helps. That's just how I see it, like from my perspective.
I would just add to that, everything Kishona just said. I would just add, I actually got reader reports from my sample chapters saying, the sample chapters read too much like a journal article. They wanted more stories, to Kishona's point. They wanted more like feeling into it. So it was kind of freeing. Like I don't think I had ever written before, adding my, like, what do I feel about this? And I can sort of add my subjectivity to it. To give an example, a concrete example, one of my chapters has focus groups with Black women talking about care networks online. And the reader wanted stories about how the focus groups came together, which is not something you would necessarily put in a journal article. I mean, you would say how you recruited the women, but you wouldn't necessarily say the story about who the women were, right? Not demographics, but how they related to each other, who the women were, like that sort of a nuance and detail I was able to put into the book. And I hope it makes it, a richer project.
In some technical ways, can you talk about, Caitlin, the process of after you submit the proposal, what should you expect? What does that process look like going forward? What comes to you? We talked about contracts and advanced contracts. We talked about reader reports. Can you kind of map out that process for us?
Of course, and I'll just say up front that the process is a little different at every press, and so you should definitely ask whenever you speak with an acquisitions editor, but generally you submit your proposal. Your proposal comes with, it often includes a couple sample chapters. Some presses, so for MSU Press, since this is if you are submitting a project on Black digital studies, this is an area I'm familiar with. It's an area we're building a list in, and so we would evaluate the proposal internally. For us, that takes about 8 weeks. I read it and then I present it to my colleagues in acquisitions, as well as my colleagues in marketing and production, and we sort of talk through the project. My acquisitions colleagues will raise any concerns they see from a content perspective. Production will raise any concerns. For example, if you want to include 50 images, that might be an issue for reasons I can explain. But then after we've talked, if we think it is a solid project, if you have a strong argument, or to circle back to what Kishona was saying, even if the project, we don't necessarily need the proposal to match the final product, but if I get some sense that like your brain is really exciting, that you think in a really cool way, then I invite the full manuscript for consideration. And I can talk more about like timelines and all that if anyone has any questions about that. Some presses, including some presses, if you want an advanced contract, will send the proposal out for what's called external review. Best practices are to send the proposal out to 2 reviewers. In the US, we do single anonymous review, which means they often know who you are, you won't know who they are. As Raven experienced, you can get, I hope what was helpful feedback on the proposal evaluation. And then that also, that's sort of some initial vetting for the acquisitions editor to go ahead and offer you an advanced contract. MSU Press doesn't necessarily do that, but that is something that some presses do. And then if you don't do an advanced contract, usually the contract will be offered after your manuscript has been through review, received 2 supportive peer review reports, and then been presented to what is called the University Editorial Advisory Board. Once they sign off on it, then at that point, I would say most, if not all, presses are at that point comfortable with offering you a contract. And yeah, there's a lot that happens in between there. I'm happy to answer any more specific questions.
That's super helpful. There was a question in the chat about why someone might want an advanced contract. I think the answer is specific to the individual and the institution that they're at. For some folks, having that advanced contract before your 3rd-year review is really useful. Some folks can actually negotiate with other presses or things like that. So it's really individual to the process. Some presses don't offer an advanced contract at all, and they require sending the full manuscript out. But for a lot of folks, it's about what institution you're at and what they are expecting. So it's a way of showing that you're making good progress toward publishing your book. So if your chair says an advanced contract would be helpful by year 2 or be helpful by year 3, then you're shooting for the advanced contract.
What do you do when you're writing about something that's particularly topical or was topical in 2021? And then things are moving so quickly. Like, how do you address that if you were specifically looking at time period?
I'll let folks on the panel want to get to that.
Yeah, if I heard you right, it sounds like you said, what do we do? Like the timeliness of like topics and themes. Is that what the question was, right? For academics, academia is slow. You listen, we still ain't wrote nothing about vines. We still got to write that. Just because vines came and went, don't mean that they're not significant. I'm thinking about like all the innovations, like with Xbox, there were so many changes and so many things happening, so many impacts on culture, just because it came and went. Like we can still speak to those kinds of things because those are like, those are like the building blocks for like the things that we talk about now. Like we can't be talking about TikToks if we don't talk about vines, all those things like, like feed like into one another. And so we also have to remember that academia is a slow entity. It is not like it's not news, it's not journalism. We can always go back and talk about MySpace and Black Planet. Like none of these things ever get old. They're always significant because there's something that can always like be told. I hope I understood your question right.
That's fun to like getting back to the proposal, right? Because how do you then make it relevant? I always remember my professor saying that like, we don't write about something because it's happening right now, because if you write just like Twitter's happening right now and this tweet's going on, in 20 years, maybe in 5, Twitter won't be a thing. Maybe in 5 months, Twitter won't be a thing, right? But the way that people interact with the platform should still be relevant. Like what your argument is not that this platform exists. It's that there's something that someone's doing with it that we need to talk about for a long time.
As a graduate student, I was really like, I'm gonna do what I want to do. But now that I have to sort of have this document, this book proposal document that sort of claims what fields and positions myself in relationship to fields, I'm feeling some tension with that. And just having, I guess my question is around how do you negotiate that within a book proposal? Is it based on specifically the press that you are proposing your book project to? And how do you negotiate those tensions?
Perhaps doing a bit more research on the presses that you're reaching out to. So for example, if you have an interdisciplinary project, one place to start is to look for presses that publish in both of those disciplines, because then they're going to be more open to projects that straddle those disciplines. And from an acquisitions perspective, what I'm thinking when I see an interdisciplinary project is, do I have the connections to scholars in both of those these fields to make sure that the manuscript is going to get adequately assessed from both perspectives? And also, to put it in blunt terms, like, do we cater to both of these markets? So for example, MSU Press, I acquire in African American Studies, but we also publish in this very small subfield called mimetic studies. And I was able, I'm working with an author who is developing a project on, African American studies, but then also engages with mimetic studies has to do with the theories of this French philosopher Rene Girard. And so it's very interdisciplinary, but because we do publish in both of those areas, that's not a concern for us because we can, again, like I just said, we can cater to both of those markets. I know I'm going to be able to get feedback from scholars who are experts in both of those areas. And so that would be my advice. I'm interested to hear what other people have to say though.
Yeah, I would also just make sure
Go ahead, you go.
you're thinking about who's reading it and you're writing about that, right? So I talk about how my book like touches digital studies, touches media studies, touches feminist studies, touches Black studies. And so I wrote that about like, one of the questions they usually ask is like, what classes could you see this being taught in, right? And so I would think about like, I could see a graduate seminar in feminist studies using chapter 4. I could see a digital studies methods class using chapter 2, right? Like, and so being that a level of specific, I think shows a little bit of work on your part, and then also having a varied list of reviewers, if you can, who can speak across, as Caitlin said, those different disciplines.
And my question is about presses and tenure standards. So more particularly, the type of institution that you're at. So I'm in a teaching institution that may accept a trade press publisher for the tenure process. However, I'm trained in, in R1 spaces. And so I shoot my bar higher to university presses. And so my question then is, do I aim for, the tenure where I'm at, or do I start, just go ahead and go towards, I guess, university presses, just in case I make a move somewhere else?
I'm so glad you asked that, Dr. Nix. You publish to keep yourself marketable. So I think that especially some of my missteps early on along the way, which a lot of people are like, why are you publishing so much? Why are you doing so much? I'm like, I'm trying to get out of EKU, because I was at a teaching institution as well, and I wanted to get out of there. And so that's one of the hardest things, like to jump from like teaching institutions to like R1. But if we've got the research behind us and the publication record, and if we're hitting those metrics that our counterparts and our peers like at our R1s are doing, then of course they can't take your work away. K-State or not, Econ, none of that matters, because your work is gonna be speaking for you. So I would say you always, just do, we were all trained at R1s, right? So you just continue to hit those metrics that we were trained for. So especially because I want you to be able to be marketable. I want you to be able to, if you want to leave K-State, I don't want you to leave Kentucky. But if you want to leave, I want you to be able to do that. Like, like if you want to do that. Yeah, absolutely. And also we have our own personal goals, right? I have aspirations. I would love to see, some of my work in one of these beautiful top fancy presses, one day, I would love for that to happen. And so the metrics that are set for me, for my personal goals that, that I have for myself, not, based on what, somebody like P&T says, right? Because I was also at a place, like when I was at EKU, they were like, Kishana, you're shiny enough. Whatever you do is just fine. I'm like, okay, that's cool. Whereas when I was at like UIC, I had like, colleagues that were like, well, Kishana, LSU Press is fine. Intersectional tech is cool. We like it, but we need to see Duke. We need to see NYU. Like they actually told me like the presses that they would like to see my next book if I wanted to go for full. So, a lot of it is institutional, your institution matters, P&T matters, but also like your own personal goals and, your personal, desires, matter as well.
I think Kishana put it so perfectly. We're aiming for the tenure that we want at the institution we want, wherever we currently are, right? And so if tenure is your goal somewhere else, then you're aiming for their standards of tenure wherever you are. And I was at Colorado State, and they said, you have to publish a book to get tenure here. You write a couple articles, you get tenure. And I was like, great, I'm gonna work on my book. I'm gonna write the articles like as though I'm going toward that goal, but I'm gonna work on the book quietly on the side. They're like, you didn't write a book till after tenure. Every institution is different. I got here and they're like, look, plus 6 articles, and the press needs to be of a high caliber, right? It needs to be here or above in order for that to count. And so if I had stayed with what the requirement was at my previous institution, I would have been far behind where I needed to be when I got to this space.
Can I just only quickly add, same, I was at Gonzaga teaching institution, everything Catherine and Kishon are saying. I will only quickly add, because the teaching load is so high at those institutions, I would find a way to scaffold the book into your classes that you're teaching. So like the same ideas, right, into your syllabus, or obviously like adding readings to your syllabus that you need for the book anyway. I did a lot of talks on campus at my teaching institution to like get some ideas out there, right? So like use your time so you can work on the book on the side for sure.
And Kishana's point about your personal goals really matters. I mean, I didn't want to be at a big name press for the sake of it. I knew that they had some resources also, right? So some university presses like MSU Press, like UCLA, like some of the presses that we publish with, they put your books up for awards. They market your book. They send them off to libraries. You end up seeing your book in places because they have whole departments that can cater to that. And some smaller presses don't have that capacity. And so there's nothing wrong with the smaller presses. They're still publishing really great work, but they may not have the same capacity to market the book, to have the same editorial staff, right? They may not have to be giving the same amount of feedback, et cetera. Even being fully transparent in these spaces because nobody was transparent with us. So it's important for us to talk about that. And I also see that Bree has a hand up. I wanted to say quickly too, though, that Caitlin mentioned alternative forms of publication for digital projects. And so if we don't get back to that, I really want Caitlin to have time to speak to what other kinds of projects can look like that are not monographs published in a traditional way within the press. So I'm gonna give you some space to do that, and then we'll talk about the money and we'll get to Bree's question.
Okay, well, so I will say for anyone who is thinking maybe a traditional print monograph is not the best form for your dissertation or your second book or what have you, more and more presses are getting into what is called digital publishing, which can include enhanced ebooks. So sort of what looks like a traditional book, but links out to audio files or has more embedded digital images. And then there are some presses, including Michigan State, but also Stanford and Brown has a press type thing, who are doing more born digital publications. And what that means is that the project doesn't have to be like a book, but online. It can be, for example, I'm working with a scholar or a team of scholars right now who have created an archive of documents that relate to perspectives on Africa published in the US during the 19th century as Africa was being colonized by other nations. And so I'll just throw that out there. It is a lot of work. It's definitely a situation where you want to reach out to acquisitions editors who publish those types of projects as early as possible, because they can help temper your expectations, I might say, and give you a sense of how you can approach these sorts of projects. But if it's something that you're interested in, if, for example, you do work with a lot of data visualizations, a lot of maps or something like that, you use GIS, then those opportunities are available. And you can, please feel free to reach out to me. I will actually drop my email in the chat because I'm happy to talk about that. I come from a DH background, and so it's something I want to see more of. I want to create more space for it within scholarly publishing.
Super exciting. Okay, the question was about money. Do you get paid for publishing the books? Kishana started to answer this in the chat, which is that you do sign a contract, and it's a legal contract that details in a lot of depth how much you will get paid for every copy of the book that is sold in paperback form and hardcover form that's sold overseas versus sold in the United States versus if there's a translation of it. So there, and it's in legalese, right? And so this is going to be, I think, an abrupt wow for a lot of folks when you get your first contract, because we don't know how to read these. Like, is that appropriate? Is that the right amount? The first thing I would say is have a mentor who has published a book before that has done pretty well. That will help you look at your contract to know if this is kind of standard. How much you can negotiate is dependent on the press, dependent on who you are, and whether you've published a book before or not, right? A lot of presses, not MSU, of course, but a lot of presses are like, you need us more than I can do, right? If you're an author who needs tenure, like, how much negotiating power do you have with the press? I need this in order to get tenure, so how much can I ask for here? But frankly, yeah, digital black feminism is done pretty well. And so like I get a check once a year based on how much is sold. But what you should assume is that you're not gonna make a lot of money on your first book. I think it's a pretty good assumption that academic presses, one, do not pay, university presses do not pay like cents on the dollar for every book that's sold. And you're not gonna make a ton of money. But maybe Kashana is balling out and I don't know. So let me defer.
Well, I was gonna say, like, early on, I think by the time intersectional tech came around, like I was able to like negotiate. So like I'm thinking like woke gaming, like maybe every I think it's quarterly, if I can remember, Caitlin. I think you all pay out like royalties. It's based on like maybe quarters, like sometimes. But I feel like for woke gaming, I get like a 1,000 every quarter, for woke gaming and for intersectional tech. So those are it's also based on the numbers that you got to do. So you see me, I'm constantly pushing the book out there. Hey, you need this for your class. You need this for this. Hey, it makes sense for that. We got to do our own, like, especially I'm at like a LSU press, I'm not at a place that has like a lot of money, LSU they don't have a lot of money to be able to do this. So I have to do like my own publishing. So, but every semester you're going to see me pushing these books so people can get it on their syllabus. Their institutions will buy it. You buy it for your mama and your granny, I'm going to do all that. We're going to do all that.
Yep, it's a hustle. It's a full hustle, right? It's like selling on like having a good social media presence and going to classes and talking about it because they'll buy your book for everyone in the class if you go to have a conversation with it. Book tours, and from my perspective, were not put on by the press. I created my own book tour, right? Which was like, do you need me to come give a talk? Send me a DM. This is what my rig is. I'll come give a talk. Some places I go and give a talk for free because it's good press for people to come out and buy the book. And I think a lot of the money that some folks make on their book is also through talks, right? It's through going places and talking about it.
I just had a quick question. Sorry, Bree. I mean, it was just about the money thing. So I thought this would be a good time to quickly ask about the trade book versus academic publishing thing. I know that trade books are useless for tenure, right? Pretty much. But as far as I'm aware, like with academic publishing, the royalties is like what, like sometimes like 7%.
Yeah, that's incredibly low.
Really, really low.
It sometimes shows up. It can be lower than that. What happens is usually after you sell a certain number, then the amount that you get per book would go higher, right? So that's at least how my contract works, is after I sold the first, let's say like 250 hard copies and the first 500 paperbacks, then the amount that I make on the book goes up after that. Because they're trying to make their money back, first of all. It costs a lot of money to print our books. It's a long process. So they're really, at first, they're trying to make their money back. They invest a lot of money in the process of printing our books.
Well, I was just wondering, do you see any benefit, like as academics, to trade publishing? I know that there's like, I've got some friends who are doing going the trade route instead. Like, is there anything that you would sort of say, like, money has been made and everything? So, like, is there any thoughts about like whether trade publishing?
After you get tenure, I would say do it after you get. If you're trying to get tenure at an academic institution, you need to put that trade book off. Because like it could be a New York Times bestseller. It won't count for tenure. You might could write a little statement about it like in your impact statement, but they do not care. But also you have to think about the route and your pathway. You could do that route, if you're okay, like with that. But I would say don't do none of that till like after tenure.
You can look at some of the public scholars, that in Black and digital studies that I won't say all the names of, but that have done trade books, and they've had really popular trade books that people read quite frequently. But their pathway to tenure at their institutions has been fraught, right? So some of the biggest names of people who are on TV and pundits and stuff like that didn't have tenure at their institutions while they were incredibly popular. So it's a choice, right? Of what thing matters to you. I want to get this book out. I want it to be for this audience versus I want an academic career and I want to get tenure at our one institution. Like I said, our guidelines are what they are. They're not going to bend them for me.
What constitutes a good contract? So it's been really great to, understand the process to get to the contract, but I'm even interested to see like what constitutes a good contract once you do get it. And because of that contract, is there something that would be beneficial to know in the book proposal process when you're shopping for publishers in the first place? So is there something that is in the contract that would be best to know about what different type of presses, I'm just trying to, like you said, be as transparent. I want to know all the things to know going into this process what that all looks like.
So most presses, their contracts are standard templates that have been approved by the university's general counsel. And so your ability to negotiate is really limited. Which by that, I mean, don't think, and also don't feel like you have to go line by line and edit a contract. I've seen some first-time authors do that, and really that just, there's nothing we can do there. A lot of the language we think through a lot of the language, like Kat mentioned earlier. Often with most books, we're just trying to break even. We're not trying to, or at least I hope most presses aren't trying to exploit you. We're not trying to trick you. But in terms of things that you can negotiate, I think we talked about scaling royalties. I think Kat mentioned that earlier. So usually for first-time authors, royalties are going to be like around 5 to 7%, but you can see if they can bump it up once you've sold. Usually it starts at like 1,000 books or something like that.
That was advice that I got about scaling that I didn't know existed, but Soft told me that, right? And was like, you can't change the fact that they have a scale, but you can maybe say like, I want the bump at 500 versus 1,000 and see what they say, right? Or I want the bump at 250 versus 500 and see what they say. So that, those small kinds of changes were at least possible.
You can also ask these are all really small things because it's small stakes in some regards, but you can ask for more author copies. Usually you get like 10, I'd say, and then after that you can buy more at a 40%, for us anyway, 40% discount. But you can ask for more if you feel you want more. You can pay attention to, we've been talking so much about the proposal process, about the writing process. One other thing to keep in mind is that's only the first half of the publishing process. Once your book goes into production, you still need to handle copy editing. Some presses will ask you to review proofs, stuff like that. And so another thing I recommend to authors is look at your personal schedule and look at the timeline laid out in your contract. See if you want more turnaround time to review copy edits, if you want more turnaround time to review proofs. You don't want to ask for too much time, but if like an extra week would help, like now's the time to ask for that. And it'll give you more space to make sure your book's as polished as possible. And I'm sure I'm forgetting, the other way to make money off of books is licensing. And so this is a small thing too, but if you have images in your books, when you're asking for permissions, make sure that you get permission. You want non-exclusive rights in perpetuity for world and all languages. Because what that means is that when the press is licensing out your book to other publishers, they then don't have to worry. If a foreign press asks for rights to publish your book, for example, I work on African studies, so we get requests to publish the book in Africa. I don't have to say like, oh no, we can't actually give you the rights to this because this one quote, we only have permission to publish in the US or something like that. So just do what you can to make it easy for the press to sell your book, to license your book to other presses. And I'll stop there. That's some really nitty-gritty stuff.
Relevant contract-wise is some presses have a right of first refusal for your next book project written into a contract. So think about if that's something that is important to you. If you're with a press that you like and you want to keep working with, maybe that's fine. But if maybe you didn't have the greatest experience or you want to try out a new press, you just don't want to be beholden, you can talk about that right of first refusal and have that cross at some places. And also increasingly, if you're writing a book that you think you have this inkling, and everyone thinks this, but it's not true, that it's going to be a popular audience is going to like your book too, right? We all think this, like every academic is like, but my book is going to be one that crosses over. No, it's like, it stops and that's it, right? But like we all think that like someone's going to really want to do something with this, but something that she told me was that about licensing for recording, right? So like how much you'll get paid if they turn it into an audiobook, or if it gets licensed out to become a part of a film, which Algorithms of Oppression did, right? So we saw that happen. And so it's not unheard of. Academic text can actually end up in a motion picture. It can end up, right? You don't see that coming. So this is not a huge concern. It's probably not going to be relevant, but that right of first refusal is something that I had eye to in terms of whether or not I wanted to publish my next academic press book with that same publisher.
I'm the difference.
It's gonna be you, it's gonna be you.